Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Hamza Foy with Ihya502 podcast. Today's episode is going to be a short episode released during our bye week. We have 3 episodes that we release each month, and I give myself a bye week to just kind of relax, organize upcoming guests, kind of arrange my schedule and topics and so on. I wanted to release this episode to get in a little bit deeper about what Ihya502 is, the segments that you should expect, the different ways that you can tune in to listen, and just kind of reaffirm the purpose and intention for Ihya502. So, alhamdulillah, we've had a pretty strong start for this podcast. I've been, elated with the positive response that I've gotten for this podcast. And, it's really that kind of response, that feedback that really, kind of puts the wind behind my sail, so to speak. It really, helps energize the production and the continuation of this podcast. So thank you again to the many people that have reached out to me in some way or fashion and told me, hey, keep trucking, because this podcast seems to really be pleasing to the audience. So Ihya502, this podcast is a podcast that focuses on the local Muslim community. The 3 segments can be described as a guest interview. That segment is Muslim musings. The second segment is basically a book review. It's called Reading Between the Lines. And then the third one tentatively is called Suhba Roundtable. This episode, we will be discussing some sort of topic or issue affecting Muslims here in Louisville. I want to be very clear to start. This podcast, it's meant to be, thought-provoking, productive, constructive. It's not meant to be destructive, or I don't want people to think that this podcast is going to be some sort of shock jock genre. So I know a number of people listening may not be familiar with that phrase, shock jock. This isn't going to be a podcast where we're going to, jokingly talk about controversy. We're not going to, peddle in, backbiting and slandering. I make it clear to guests that I bring on, which I've had one guest so far, and that was Brother Salahim Muqarrab. And, I don't want names dropped. Let's not engage in that kind of that ghiba, that backbiting. I'm not going to also talk about the latest social media conspiracy or controversy involving Muslims. I really don't think that's conducive to a healthy podcast that is meant to provoke thinking, provoke people into becoming more constructive and productive members of our local ummah. So there won't I'm not going to be, an Alex Jones on the mic. I'm not going to be a Don Imus on the mic. For those who are familiar with those two, I'm just not going to get on here and rant and rave. I'm reminded of a hadith, and of course, when I reference Quran verses or hadiths, unless I have it like directly in front of me, like on my phone, I'm going to be paraphrasing, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that man, can utter a word that, though he may think it trivial, though he may think it not so serious, will plunge him into the depths of the hellfire. And he also says that man could utter a word that, although he doesn't think it's very eloquent or very important, may actually raise him into a high station in heaven. I'm reminded of that hadith because I do treat this podcast with a high degree of respect and dignity, and I also want the audience to know that I treat you guys with a high degree of respect and dignity. So I'm not gonna put out content that is just meant to confuse you or to upset you or to antagonize people in our community. We may talk about local issues, but I want to be clear. We're going to talk about issues, as best as I can, ensure that, especially like guests and other speakers, keep in mind, we're going to talk about issues in a way that is more, let's look for solutions. Like, yes, obviously we should understand root causes of a problem or an issue, but let's also say, hey, how can we build? How can we fix? How can we repair? How can we rehabilitate? That is a strong intention of mine with this podcast, is to get people to think in that manner, to think critically, but also how can we fix and repair and rehab. How can we improve? That's another thing, as Muslims. I know many Muslims are kind of familiar with this term of ihsan, and it's like, let's not settle on mediocre. Let's try to improve. Let's try to excel. So of course, that's one of my intentions with this podcast is let's start thinking, let's raise that bar. Let's get better. Let's improve. So that's one of the intentions, especially when we talk about issues or topics. One of the segments where I invite guests, one of my other intentions is that I want our Muslim community to become more familiar with one another. So, we live in a secular country, a country where, we as Muslims are not the majority. So our kind of places of interchange where we're actually like brushing shoulders, saying salams, interacting with one another, one of the few locations for that interchange is the masjid. And now that we have we are experiencing this COVID-19 pandemic, fewer and fewer people are attending that masjid. Now I want to be very clear. I want to be explicit. I understand why people are cautious about coming to the masjid, because once again, with COVID-19, we want to avoid, large gatherings. So once again, I completely understand why people are, staying away from the masjid. But in a way, this podcast is kind of trying to think long term, where it's like, I want to bring on guests that you may be interested in actually meeting once, this pandemic starts to die down and we have kind of a return to normalcy, as in, the masjids will start to fill up more. And, we have a number of Muslims that, perhaps, they, may not be visiting the masjids as much, even prior to COVID. Perhaps you may hear of a guest or guests where you're like, you know what? I really want to come to the masjid and meet brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. The guests that I bring on, I'm going to try to have them talk about their experiences, or perhaps, an interest that they hold dear, or perhaps a profession, a skill, a, knowledge base that you'll be like, you know what, I'm really digging that. I'm really interested in learning more about, X interest or X base of knowledge or X skill. I really want to, meet brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. For example, one of my guests, and I've already, been in contact with him. One of my guests will be talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. You may be really interested in learning more about that. So I want this podcast to connect people in that way. Thirdly, or a third intention is I do want people to become more familiar with the deen. Now, I have to be, careful, though, and I have to make it clear that unless I have like an imam on or a scholar on, when we discuss, parts of our faith, parts of our, Islamic tradition, please don't take it authoritatively. What I will try to do, because this has especially helped me as somebody who, took the Shahada in my early teen years and grew up learning a lot about Islam. I will try to do my best in giving like citations or recommending books that you can read about, any particular topic that falls under the Islamic tradition, whether it's about Islamic finance, or even something as basic as the fard ayn, the individual obligations that you have as a practicing Muslim. I want this podcast to kind of reignite that interest in Islam in such a way that the casual manner of this conversation makes people more comfortable to think, while not treating this podcast necessarily as an authoritative source for your Islam. Hopefully it reignites your interest in the deen and trying to really understand like the breadth and the depth of our tradition. And of course, the sources that I'll try to provide, the books that I'll try to recommend, and once again, the imams and the scholars that I'll bring on time to time, go to them for more authoritative information to kind of cement the knowledge that you hopefully can glean from this podcast. So really, those are my three big intentions with this podcast. Now, for more, I guess you could say, technical information about Ihya502. So, Ihya502, we have a website that I coded from scratch. I host it on a static site generator called glitch.me. I won't get too, too deep in the jargon. But basically, the website I designed myself, I maintain myself, and it's Ihya-502.glitch.me. I will, place that website in the YouTube description and in the description where I post on Facebook and on Instagram. This website is kind of the hub to either listen to the latest episode. So when you first visit the website, you'll see this, prominent, play button, and it'll have the date of the latest episode, the topic. You can listen to the latest episode directly on the website. You can listen to it from your computer or laptop or from your mobile device. Doesn't matter if you have iPhone or Android, it plays all the same. On the website, I also have the calendar each month of when episodes will be released. So you'll see, when Muslim Musings will be released, when Reading Between the Lines will be released, and when Suhba Roundtable will be released, and you'll also see when the bye week is. Once again, it really depends on how busy I am. I may release, kind of a more casual and uncategorized episode during the bye week, but I'm not going to promise that happens each month. And then when you scroll down, you will see a link to the YouTube channel. All episodes are uploaded there. You'll be able to contact me. I have a Gmail for the podcast, and you'll be able to visit our Spotify page. So you can listen on Spotify. I also maintain a newsletter, which I send out, letters, fairly regularly, with a lot of, important information, job opportunities, programs that can be of benefit to our Muslim community. That is hosted on what is called Substack. I also post podcast episodes on Substack, and I do have a Facebook and an Instagram page specifically for Ihya502. If you use Facebook, I do encourage you to get on the Ihya502 page, like and follow. They are two different things. And I have a post in there that gives instructions on how to make sure that posts from the Ihya502 page actually show up like right when you load your Facebook app. You may be somebody who likes like 50 different pages and maybe has 500 friends, and so you can follow those instructions on the Ihya502 Facebook page to ensure that new posts will show up for you immediately. We do have an Instagram page. I do post on there as well. So it's YouTube, Substack, Spotify, Facebook page, Instagram page. Those 5 mediums are where I will send out new episodes. My email is open to anybody who wants to get into contact with me. Those who know me fairly well may have like my phone number. You feel welcome to message me on WhatsApp. I am pretty diligent in checking text messages and WhatsApp. I'm not in like 100 groups on WhatsApp, so when you message me, don't worry, it shows up when I open my WhatsApp, and I respond fairly quickly. This, hopefully this will kind of help give people more insight in what I'm doing with Ihya502, and hopefully encourages more people to follow and listen along. Jazakallah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum.